The Be Quiet Shadow Rock Slim 2 is the second model in the Shadow Rock Slim series, launched around 2021. While the Dark Rock Pro series is aimed towards performance, the Shadow Rock Slim coolers are designed to deliver a good cooling performance while being silent and affordable, and in this review we will put those claims to the test. The Shadow Rock Slim 2 can be had for around $47 at the time of this review. This puts this CPU cooler in the same price segment as the Noctua NH-U12S Redux, the Deepcool AK500 and the Cooler Master Hyper 212 Black Edition. So right in between the mid-tier air CPU coolers. The design of the Shadow Rock Slim 2 is similar with the Shadow Rock Slim, the first model in the series, with a silver heatsink and a brushed aluminum top cover plus an all-black fan. The heat pipes are made from copper and the CPU cooler uses a direct touch baseplate design, but more on that later. The heatsink used with the CPU cooler has a single tower design and can accommodate up to two 135mm fans for a push-pull configuration. The heatsink uses 33 aluminum-made cooling fins to dissipate the heat of the CPU. These fins are not bent on the sides, as is the case for many CPU coolers. Instead, the sides of these fins are shaped to provide a good grip for the fan mounting clips. The top plate that covers the heatsink and the heat pipes endings is made from solid aluminum and has a subtle brushed texture. Fortunately, this plate can be removed with ease as it is attached to the heatsink with just two hexagonal screws. With the plate removed, you get to see the endings of the heat pipes, which are not evenly machined, hence why the top plate is used to cover them up. This method of covering up the heat pipes endings is cheaper and better than having the heat pipe perfectly machined, so it's an obvious move. Speaking of the heat pipes, the Shadow Rock Slim 2 has only 4 of them, made from copper and with the standard auto diameter of 6mm. These heat pipes are arranged in a U shape to not only make contact with all fins, but to create a sturdy structure for the heatsink. As I've said in the first minute of this review, this CPU cooler has a direct touch baseplate design. This means that the heat pipes are integrated into the surface of the baseplate. This design is regarded as inferior when compared to a solid copper made baseplate, as its surface is not as even as it can be when we have a block of solid copper. The fans included with the CPU cooler is a Be Quiet BQ-SIW3-133-21-MR-PWM. This model is 134mm and is part of the Silent Wings 3 series, even though it's not marketed as such. This fan uses 9 impellers which have the well-known Be Quiet design, which will reduce the noise while keeping the performance at the same level. Speaking of performance, this fan has a maximum speed of 1400 RPM and can be controlled through PWM. However, it cannot be stopped via software, so keep that in mind. The cable of this fan is long enough and it is all black. Unfortunately, it has no sleeving to protect its wires, so I would advise you to take care when you are bending it at sharp angles. The accessory included with the Shadow Rock Slim 2 are what you need to install and use the CPU cooler. This includes a user manual, 2 sets of fan mounting clips, one longer and one shorter. These are used to install two 135mm fans on both sides of the heatsink, hence the differences in size. Then we get a backplate, metal studs, rubber washers, thumb screws with double threads, a tube of thermal compound, mounting bars for both platforms, a mounting beam and 2 Phillips screws for the before-mentioned beam. The installation procedure with this CPU cooler is easy, but it could have been much better. We start with the backplate and then you need to install the metal studs through the backplate and secure them in place with these smaller rubber grommets. Afterwards, you place the backplate on the back of the motherboard, then at the front, you thread in the double-threaded thumb screws over the studs. This will essentially install the backplate onto the motherboard. Afterwards, you place the mounting arms over them and secure them with these small Phillips screws. Finally, you apply the thermal compound on the CPU surface and place the CPU cooler over it. Afterwards, you get a mounting beam and place it over the baseplate of the CPU cooler and then secure it with the bigger Phillips screws, the mounting beam effectively holding the CPU cooler over the CPU surface. Finally, you install the fan and connect it to the fan header of your motherboard and you are done. It's a good mounting system, but it's a bit outdated as it requires a lot of steps to be installed. It's not exactly user-friendly either, not because it's complex, but because it has so many parts that can be lost with ease. And with the CPU cooler installed in the testing system, we can see that the clearance with the Shadow Rock Slim 2 is good. And when we talk about the RAM clearance, things are looking great, as the front fan does not even reach the RAM slots of the motherboard, let alone interfere with your RAM modules. The graphics card clearance though is average at best, with only 20mm of space between the fan clips of the CPU cooler and the graphics card. Before we test the performance of the CPU cooler, you will get to hear a noise sample of the CPU cooler with its included fan going from its lowest speed to the maximum, in this case 1400 RPM. I am doing this because while a decibel value is useful for a fair comparison, it does not take into consideration other noise sources, such as vibrations from the fan, bearing ticking, and wind noise. With a single 135mm fan running at 1400 RPM, the Shadow Rock Slim 2 reached a maximum noise output of 35 decibels with the measuring device placed at the standard distance of 10 cm from the CPU cooler. The performance testing is done using an Intel i9-9900K CPU, which is running at both its factory turbo boost frequency and then overclocked to 5 GHz on all cores, the ambient temperature being set at 26 degrees Celsius throughout the entire testing of the CPU cooler. The first test uses the Intel BurnTest V2 benchmark, a popular CPU testing benchmark that is mostly used to test the stability of overclocked CPUs. What is good about this software is that it simulates a CPU load that is similar with what you can get while playing a modern video game. And in this test, the Shadow Rock Slim 2 reached a maximum temperature of 71 degrees Celsius with the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz and 60 degrees Celsius with the CPU running at its factory turbo boost frequency. Quite a good result, which places the Be Quiet Shadow Rock Slim 2 next to the Silencium PC Ferra 5 and the Noctua NH-D9L. However, the next test is where each CPU cooler is pushed to its very limit, as this test uses the system stability test of the AIDA64 Extreme software. This piece of software will place a load on the CPU that is so high that you will rarely if ever encounter it in your daily usage. In fact, the only CPU load that even comes close to this is rendering a video using the CPU as the only rendering unit. And in this test, the maximum temperature reached with the Shadow Rock Slim 2 is 89 degrees Celsius with the CPU overclocked to 5 GHz and 65 degrees Celsius with the CPU running at its factory turbo boost frequency. Even with a high temperature of 89 degrees Celsius, the performance of the Be Quiet Shadow Rock Slim 2 is impressive. And I say that because this is not a large CPU cooler, nor is it expensive or designed to dethrone the high-end models from other manufacturers. This is a CPU cooler that is designed to look good and be quiet while cooling adequately. The Be Quiet Shadow Rock Slim 2 is a good air CPU cooler that performs well even with a single 145mm fan, and you get the required fan clips to use a second 145mm fan for a push-pull configuration. The biggest advantage of this CPU cooler is the low noise output, even with its fan at maximum RPM, and while the decibel value is not the lowest we've seen, the actual noise that the fan generates is the lowest we've heard. This is due to many things: the shape of the impellers, the shape of the cooling fins of the heatsink, and so on. But the important thing here is that even at maximum RPM, the CPU cooler will not disturb you. The mounting system is good and not a hassle to install, but it requires a redesign as it has way too many parts, especially when comparing to the Noctua mounting systems that are simple and do the same job, just better. For around $47, this CPU cooler is a good deal for a mid-range gaming system that does not require addressable RGB LEDs on its CPU cooler. The cooling performance is good too, especially since this cooler has just a fan for its active cooling. And when we talk about the build quality, everything is looking great, with no sharp edges, no misaligned items, and nothing to complain overall. And thus, if you want a CPU cooler for your gaming system and don't want to break your wallet, then the Be Quiet Shadow Rock Slim 2 is a great choice, thanks to its price, performance, and low noise output. If you like this review, then you might consider subscribing for more, and if you want to support me in the direct way, then in the description below you will find the links for both the Patreon and the Subscriber Star pages of this channel.